Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Diminishing Returns. It's part one of a three-part Quentin Tarantino season that we are undertaking. Just as with our previous seasons, looking at M. Night Shyamalan, the Alien franchise and the Star Wars series, this is going to be a complete retrospective of the works of Quentin Tarantino. This week we begin at the beginning with, well, his early work. Everything up to and including Jackie Brown. Now, please indulge me as this show becomes the 1000th thing to parody that slow-motion iconic sequence from Reservoir Dogs.
This episode contains spoilers for My Best Friend's Birthday, Reservoir Dogs, True Romance, Pulp Fiction, Natural Born Killers, 4 Rooms, From Dusk Till Dawn, and Jackie Brown. Enjoy!
Hello and welcome to Diminishing Returns. I'm Sol. With me as always is Mr. Alan Turing. And
Hello.
This week we are joined by special guest Daniel Straw.
Hello there.
Dan Straw. Dan the man. Straw. Straw man.
The straw man, Dan.
The straw man. The straw man argument. And it's a special week. It's part one of our season of episodes looking at the one, the only 90s provocateur auteur, Quentin Tarantino. Mr. Film Remix himself.
Yeah.
All right.
So we're doing this as a three-parter. We split his career up into 3 sections. And this being the first part is going to be the good one. So
Yeah, we'll see.
have I revealed my feelings already?
Well, I hope those are actually, because that's good. That means we're not just going to be parroting each other's opinions back and forth. This sounds
Yeah.
like we might actually get into a bit of a spat.
Good. Okay, so just to introduce Dan. Dan was someone who was at university with us, just like Calvin was. So
Dan is my other gay friend, so he seems like the best replacement for Calvin.
That's it.
is that you've only got 2 gay friends?
From the
I
north.
thought you were a metropolitan man, Sol.
No, 2 gay friends, 2 black friends.
That's the best amount, like, of any.
So Dan, give us a quick, just for the listeners at home, give us a quick idea of your film tastes. What's the sort of favourite films, anything like that?
Well, I originally got into like filmmaking because I liked American Beauty, but then Kevin.
Very pretentious.
Yeah,
films,
very
actually. This
very
was a point.
pretentious. Yeah.
I used to call Dan Pretentious Pete at uni because he, if there was a new Wes Anderson film on the way out, you could.
Oh yeah, good old
guarantee
Wes
you could
Anderson as
pop
well.
or Michel Gondry
Yeah.
pop down to the cinema and Dan would be there just with a big thing of popcorn.
Who doesn't love aesthetically pleasing films? That's like, perfectly
Style
symmetrical
over
shots.
Films in French.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, yeah, I mean, Tarantino, should we just... I've gone back and, as I'm sure you have, Ellen, I've gone back and rewatched everything Tarantino had ever... Like, I'd seen it all before, with the exception of 1 or 2 little side projects that I'll go into when we get there. I'd seen it all before. I thought I had a good grasp on the guy. I've gone back and watched everything in chronological order from the start, and it's really... My mind's blown how much I feel like I understand this guy now compared to before. Like, I really do feel like I've got a perfect grip on where he's coming to things from, how his career's developed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we'll get into that, I suppose, as this goes on.
Yeah. I don't really want to do too big broad strokes because I haven't rewatched all the films yet. I'm still working my way through them. And so I'd like to rewatch some of the later ones before...
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not really up to date
broad.
with the later ones. It's more his older stuff that I'm a lot more familiar with. But
well, focusing on the earlier stuff today, I remember at uni, in fact, Dan, you'll have to remind me where you fell with this, but I remember it being a big bone of contention when we were at uni, the sort of are you pro or against Tarantino, because I think he's become less of a divisive figure than he was, but this was this was pre-Inglourious Bastards. He just made Death Proof, Grindhouse. This was when we were at uni. So there was this sense that, I mean, not to kind of get ahead of our thoughts on those films, but there was this prevailing feeling of he's a man on the decline, his career's on the turn, he's kind of making increasingly, like, just... Lots of people thought Inglourious Bastards was just going to be a remake of the 70s film with the almost identical title. So there was this sense of, he's run out of material, he's a hack, he's a one-trick pony, blah, 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 blah. But there's a whole generation of people who act like he is this filmmaking messiah based on the films we're about to discuss in this episode, his early work, because he really was the voice of a new filmmaking generation, really. He was that kind of... I can't think of any other filmmaker that sort of was as influential for that kind of Generation X wave of filmmaking.
See, he was. But I personally still think, especially back then, he came across as a bit of an asshole.
This was it. I mean, I don't quite know how broad I should get. My thoughts on the guy... basically, until very recently, I've always thought this is a very talented man, not as talented as people make him out to be, because a lot of his films are bordering on just being spoofs, but fine. Yeah. We'll get into that later. But he's clearly, like, on the spectrum and has no social skills or self-awareness and has been very lucky. And there's a lot of clips of him spitting on newscasters and getting into heated debates. But the thing is, I've listened to a lot of stuff with Tarantino lately, partly because of these podcasts we were doing, and I truly think the man has matured and grown as a person a hell of a lot, and I think that comes across in his later films, but I don't want to jump too far ahead. So this is early Tarantino, and he was just kind of like a guy with no social skills who'd watched a load of movies, and I think that comes across in his films as well.
Yes, it definitely does.
At the very, very start, have either of you guys seen My Best Friend's Birthday?
No. Was it even finished? I don't know.
It was never completed, but there is a sort of half-hour, 35-minute cut of the film available online now.
Okay.
Dig up. Actually, you know what, guys? Before we get into this, I'm just going to pour myself a tasty beverage to set the tone. That's my little Tarantino reference for the day.
Might smoke a red apple cigarette then.
And I'm having a wank to Uma Thurman's feet. So that's my reference.
Oh, man. But basically, My Best Friend's Birthday, it was the first attempt at a feature. Apparently, everyone involved just kind of lost interest while they were making it. You can watch it, you can tell it's from the exact same... You can tell he's from the same wave of filmmakers as Kevin Smith, because it's similar to Clerks. It's that kind of incredibly low-budget thing. And it's basically True Romance. There's a lot of the DNA of... In fact, it's almost like a prequel to True Romance. Tarantino plays this guy who works at a radio station who you know that there's Elvis man and Beatles man, and I'm not saying you can't be a Beatles man who likes Elvis and you can't be an Elvis man who likes the Beatles, but sometimes a guy got to come to a choice. It's like, all right, great.
You know, I was thinking about something. You know, I mean, it's not like I don't disagree with you. I mean, as a singer, Elvis. I mean, as a performer with albums and recordings, nobody could lay a hand on him. I agree. Okay. All right. So right.
Right.
All right. So we got no problem. Right?
We got no problem as far as him
as an actor, Clarence. He was a lost cause.
This is where we differ. No. We will always differ.
There's no argument. There's no argument.
We're always going to have the same goddamn.
Marlon Brando is a great actor,
and
Clarence.
He made some shitty movies. Contestant from Hong Kong is a shitty
never
movie.
made a shitty movie, Clarence.
Contestant from Hong Kong
never made a shitty movie.
Dick.
Yeah, we get it.
We get it. It's fine.
But it's very interesting. It's a film that if it had been finished, you'd watch it and go, yeah, I can see this guy's got talent. I can see there's, something to come from this guy. But yeah, if you're interested in Tarantino, I highly recommend watching it just as an artifact of his career.
Yeah.
His career was sort of famously, he was a film nerd who worked in a video store.
Yeah.
And sort of in the early 90s when nerds who worked in video stores were suddenly able to make films, and there's independent movement like Kevin Smith, like Richard Linklater, and smaller production companies were kind of going, ooh, this has got potential, and all these things that were happening. It was a very exciting time. And Tarantino was one of the ones that rose to the top for reasons of talent.
Yeah.
But obviously, it's also same as Kevin Smith. There's a bit of luck in there that you're in the right place, right
absolutely,
time.
yeah.
But definitely the talent has risen to the top there. My problem with Tarantino as I'm watching it again is that I do feel like I'm watching someone copy things he's seen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And copy them in an appropriate way, mostly. And it feels like, oh, I like that, so I'm going to do it, rather than, what can I do to make this scene work?
True.
It's impossible to not kind of hint at where I'm going with this. That's something I think he's guilty of in his earlier films. I think he's kind of learned how to make use of things and homage as he's gone on, but I agree.
Well, what do you mean by earlier films? Because
the ones we're talking about in this
see,
episode.
I don't know. I think this feels much more...
I think it arguably gets worse as we move into the second episode we'll be talking about, but I
mean, Kill Bill and
yeah.
I think is just complete.
But I think that's him being given a budget to play with, and then he kind of almost gets it out of the system, frankly.
Yeah, so in Reservoir Dogs, that is not pedestrian directing. That is not, right, I need to show this, I'll put the camera at it. There is some very interesting directing choices there, but obviously limited with that low budget style. You're not going to have a crane shot. You're not going to have there's not even any tracking shots, is it? It's all kind of like handheld stuff, but definitely directorial flair there.
Oh yeah,
yes.
So I mean, Reservoir Dogs it's often pointed to as one of Tarantino's best films, one of his masterpieces. So this was the first time I've gone back to it in probably 15 years. It was very interesting to do so. I wasn't sure if I was going to come away thinking, yeah, amazing, or I hate that. My notes are probably going to make it quite obvious, but I'm just going to go into them. So, I mean, my first note, painfully Tarantino-y opening.
Yes.
So it opens on them talking about, it's them just sat around the dinner table in the diner, isn't it? The iconic scene. And he's talking about... Madonna's like a virgin. This whole scene just feels like a parody of Tarantino. It's I think it's never more obvious than it is here.
But that's with the context of his career. This is the first thing you've ever seen from him.
Yeah, and like I say, I think it's easy to see how in the context of 1992 this was quite refreshing and appealed to people. I also think it's this film's guilty of complete and utter tangents that don't add anything to the characterization.
I've just literally just put as my first note of that from that very scene is just mindless chatter.
Yeah.
Like,
well, okay, let me jump in and defend here, because this is going to be a recurring theme of Reservoir Dogs, I believe. Me defending it, because I love Reservoir Dogs, and having watched it again just the other day. For the first time in many years, I was a bit like, okay, I'm really interested to go back to these early films that I haven't seen for years, see if they hold up.
Yeah.
This one really held up for me. But that opening scene does a lot to set character. It sets the tone of the piece. I think it does achieve a great purpose.
I don't think it establishes any real character other than...
I do agree with Alan there. I do. Like
it sets the tone.
And it's just enough. It doesn't drag on too long. I think it's shot in such a way that it's not boring, which when you've got 8 people or whatever around a table, that's a difficult thing to shoot. Mm-hmm. And although it's largely irrelevant to the story, it works. It's the same way Jules and Vincent talking about what burgers called in Amsterdam. It just builds character.
Well, that's it. I think, not to jump ahead, I think Pulp Fiction does the same thing, but it really does develop the character, and you get a sense for their backstory and who they are, and it does add to the journey they're going through. In Reservoir Dogs, to me, I never feel like I do get a massively good sense of who any of them are, other than, oh, that one's clearly Tarantino. Oh, and that one was also clearly written to be Tarantino, but then Steve Buscemi agreed to do it, so they're just the same character.
Basically, I think one of the major reasons I like Reservoir Dogs is that it really hit... it really hits all my buttons. No, I don't find it slow and boring at all.
Nothing happens?
No, that's not true at all. I don't think that's a fair...
Reservoir Dogs to me feels like Act 1 of a story that never gets going. It just never quite... There's stuff in there I like, but it's just so drawn out. I love that Tim Roth's dying throughout the film. I think that's great. But the scene with him in the getaway car on the way to the warehouse, it goes on so long. And it's like, we get it. We get it. We get your dynamic. We get he's dying. Next scene. Yeah. And there's so many scenes where they just outstay their welcome. The whole flashback with Tim Roth, and it's like, I don't care about this character enough to know that this was how he came to be here.
Oh, yeah, I know another good example as well, when Chris Penn and Michael Madsen are fighting. Yeah. And it's just like, all right, we get it.
Yeah.
There's a homoerotic tension here, move on.
There's so much of that in this film, and I think scenes where they just go off on one...
I weirdly didn't mind that.
Pop culture conversation just exacerbate it.
Okay, yeah, I take your point. I must admit, watching this film, I don't feel it's too long, and you know, you're saying that like because I like that sort of thing. I don't think this is slow and plodding, but I like.
Yeah,
that.
it's not plodding.
Yeah, I'm not saying I'm not saying it's a bad thing.
Yeah, I was making fun of your taste more than anything. That's right. This is a film I was very happy to sit down and go through it for the first time in forever, and I probably will revisit this film at some point in the future. It was, you know, it wasn't awful. I mean, it wasn't even bad. No. It's just I really don't think it's as good as people make out, so I'm
that's the thing, whenever something's held up high, you have to sort of like push it down, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay, so but basically the whole setup, like a small group of characters, they're all trapped together for some reason. That's perfect for me. And I think, I mean, I can't really remember that far back, but I think Reservoir Dogs is one of those films that made me enjoy film and made me get into film. Because it just seems, for whatever reason, it picks up on things that I like. I like films that could work as plays, I think, is kind of a good way to describe it.
Yeah.
And I think Reservoir Dogs would work as a play.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
100%
I think if you took out all those flashback scenes and you just had the scenes, just did a cut of the film that was just the scenes in the warehouse, It opens with Harvey Keitel pulling Tim Roth into the warehouse, and it ends with the Mexican standoff. I think I'd really like that. It'd be like a 50-minute film or something.
Yeah.
And I bet it would work really well. There'd be all this information that you don't quite know.
Yeah.
And obviously they use that in the film. You never see the heist properly, but they're telling stories about it. Oh, Mr. Blonde was shooting people. I was genuinely, after I watched it, I thought, I'm going to watch this again and just skip those bits, which I didn't actually do, but I'd like to do it. But I kind of want to leave a bit more time, so that it wasn't so fresh.
Yeah, perhaps it does need more of a confusion spin on it than it does. It does kind of like guide you through it, of being like, this is this person, this is why they're doing this is this person. Like, obviously,
you need a fan edit of it where it just cuts to a card that says "missing reel" at several points.
One thing I wanted to mention, because it does sort of come throughout his earlier works, I can't really vouch for like later on. I mean, I have seen like his later films, but it is more so these older ones that I've gone back and watched. But is his obsession with distorting time or chopping time up?
This is far more prevalent in his early work, and again, to me here it screams of filmmaker early into their career trying to make something a bit more interesting than it otherwise would be. I mean, to be fair, he does this in The Hateful Eight. I don't want to get too far ahead. I think it's become a lot more just organic, basically, in his later work, and a lot more just an example of good writing, whereas here it feels very
choppy is what I was thinking. Like,
Are we able to move on to the scene, the big famous one?
The scene, yeah, sure.
Well, which scene are you talking about? The end?
The famous scene. The ear scene.
It's all famous, it's great.
Yeah, the scene.
Oh, torture scene, yeah.
Like, reading about it, this was deemed to be, like, shocking when this came out.
I was going to ask you about this as well, because, there seems to be this thing about, specifically Reservoir Dogs, that it was this horrific violence, and it was... And you watch True Romance and Natural Born Killers, and it makes more sense, but with this...
Weirdly, at this point, I put, like, in this scene that there was a graphic reveal without being too graphic, because...
Well, you never actually see it. It was the old cutaway psycho shower scene trick, because, I guess, budgetary reasons, but...
Yeah, well, I think it's really nicely done. I think it works. It's very menacing and scary without being just gory for its own sake.
I really sat up to pay attention when this scene started to happen, and I don't know, maybe it's lost impact because it's been so heavily parodied, but what really struck me was the bit I found the most interesting and exciting in the scene is the bit where he walks out and goes to his car and grabs the bottle of petrol, and the music sort of shuts up in the background, and then walks back, and it's all one take. I thought that was really interesting, like, stuff. You never see that bit referred to or parodied or anything. It's just the guy dancing around the chair, and I don't really know what it is about that people connect with. Is it just nice the juxtaposition of that song and violence, and that's somehow menacing? Because if that's all it is, I've seen films from the 60s that did that. Saturday Night and Sunday Morning has a fantastic scene where this guy beats the shit out of another guy outside a carnival. And
well, Clockwork Orange, your favourite is an obvious example, isn't it? Yeah. But like you say, we follow Mr. Blonde out to the car. That's because we as an audience are then with Mr. Blonde. We're participating in this activity rather than holding on Marvin, is it? The policeman and suffering, and we go, okay, we sympathise with his suffering. We're with Mr. Blonde, and we're with him. We're unintentionally on his side now. I don't know where Quentin Tarantino saw it and stole it from, but it's a good idea.
Yeah, that's Reservoir Dogs. Should we rate it? Move on?
Yeah.
I think it's an incredibly overrated film, personally. I think it's a very messy film. There's a lot of merit to it. There's a lot of clear talent behind it, but I don't think it really does hold up as a piece of work in its own regard. So from me, it's a 6 out of 10.
A 6? Oof. Well, I was going to be a bit more generous than that and give it around, like 7 at least, I'd say. I don't know if we were going like 7 point whatnot, like, but...
you got to go 7 or 8.
I'm going to go for a 7 then with Reservoir Dogs. Like it's
Well, I really like this film, and it does definitely, for whatever reason, pushes my personal buttons. But anyway, the point is, it's 10 out of 10 for me.
Ooh.
10 out of 10?
Have you ever given a 10 before, Alan? Oh, maybe
yeah, we've done Alien as well. But yeah, genuinely, this would probably be in my top 10 favourite films.
Really?
And not just that I like it personally, it inspires me. It feels like, I could probably make a film like that. It feels like it's more aspirational as well. I like low budget stuff. I like independent films. I'm much more forgiving of things in them.
I get the impression it's all downhill from here for you. Whereas for me, it's going to be.
You may well get that impression.
Yeah, mine's going to go higher than this, more than likely.
Shall we move on to True Romance, which was a film I believe he'd written before Reservoir Dogs, but sold and went into production and everything as a result of the success he had with Reservoir Dogs. That's something that often happens in Hollywood. If you're a writer on the up and up, and then you have a big success, all these producers go, "Oh, hang on, didn't we buy something by that writer a few years ago? Oh yeah, it's
get it made."
True Romance is another one like Reservoir Dogs, where a lot of people will go, "Best thing Tarantino ever did," and they're wrong.
They?
But
they're definitely wrong.
Loads of people point to it as like
I'm going to come clear with this, and so I've never actually seen True Romance. So where does this fall on the scale of Tarantino films then in the ones that we're discussing? Like, I don't need the rating, but like generally, where are we?
It's arguably the most Tarantino-y film ever made, even though he didn't direct it.
In terms of script, yeah, the central character is sort of a Tarantino like fantasy.
Yeah, I think he himself said that it's like the most personal film he's ever made. There's a lot about it that just doesn't work for me. I do like it, don't get me wrong, but basically Harvey Weinstein early on, I say I hate to be siding with him. Harvey Weinstein early on said that they were wrong to cast an attractive, good-looking guy such as Christian Slater in the lead, and it needed to be someone a bit more odd, and he suggested Steve Buscemi.
Yeah.
And
I think the higher up producers on the film basically had him fired and were like, "Piss off! Don't know what you're talking about. He's the lead. You need to be sexy." And it's like, no, I look at this now and I think, yeah, Steve Buscemi would have been way better, because you don't really know what level this film is pitched at. You don't know if you're meant to be on Clarence's side or if you're meant to think he's this creepy, autistic guy who doesn't know how to interact with people and gets lucky one day, because this is the thing, it's so clearly a Tarantino Mary Sue character is this guy who works in a comic book shop rather than a video rental store, and goes off on rants and raves about Elvis and the Beatles and stuff rather than the films he's watched. But like the broad strokes of the plot, Dan, are he goes to it's his birthday, so he goes to watch like a marathon of kung fu movies in the cinema on his own.
You can tell this is a Tarantino film because it's a world where there's a cinema in Detroit playing a triple bill of fucking 20-year-olds and an attractive young woman who just goes there on her own, which obviously, as it turned out, was a ploy. But
yeah, this attractive young woman shows up, gets talking to him. They have this whirlwind romance. It's soon...
He, for some reason, believes that she's actually gone there to watch kung fu films. Like you do.
Basically, it turns out that she is an escort that was hired by his friend, and his friend sort of set it up like, you go there, Clarence, he's lonely and a loser and he never gets laid, so you go and pretend to be interested in him and I'll pay you for it.
Which is why it's a bit of a problem that it's Christian Slater.
Yeah.
Because
it's not believable.
Well, because he's not only a sexy man, but he's a very charismatic, charming man.
And he does play it like he's a bit of a weirdo who likes to hang around in comic book stores and that sort of thing, but not...
But it comes across like he's the male equivalent of a kind of manic pixie dream girl. He comes across as, hey, this guy is a bit eccentric, and that's cool, because he's confident and he knows what he's doing. It doesn't play in the way I think it's intended, which is, oh, he's a bit creepy, this guy. I had a similar birthday this year, guys. I totally related to that. I went to see Ready Player One on my own, had an ice cream. An advanced screening. No sexy woman came and started talking to me through it.
Well, I didn't really like this film. I'll put that out there.
I thought you were going to be one of the people who really does like this one, and I was going to be the guy who got to rally against it. But I guess I'm going to have to switch gears and defend it. Am I? Fine.
It's just bullshit. The beginning of the story is total nonsense. It's like this kind of instant love story that they sum up in 10 minutes so that we can get on with the plot.
Yeah. I hate it because, again, they basically fall in love like that. Yeah.
Immediately after they get married, there's this little scene where suddenly it's weird and tense, and it's like the end of The Graduate, and it's like, what have we done? But then it immediately just goes on to the next thing where he decides he has to go and kill her pimp to get her free.
That is the natural progression.
Yeah.
and again, like I say, there's a real undercurrent, more than any other Tarantino film. There is a weird undercurrent of sexism throughout this film. There's a lot of weird racial stuff. The pimp is part of that for me. Like, I do quite enjoy the character.
It's a fantastic performance.
But it was so clearly written as, that, you know what, this character's such a stereotype, this is offensive. Well, let's make him white, and then it's all right. Okay. It's Gary Oldman doing a weird, it is, isn't it? Gary Oldman doing a weird, impression of a black man.
That sounds awkward to me.
Let's see. We're sitting down here, ready to negotiate. You've already given up your shit. I'm still a mystery to you. But I know exactly where your white ass is coming from. See, if I ask if you want some dinner, and you grab the egg roll and start to try down, I say to myself, this motherfucker, he's carrying on like he ain't got a care in the world, and who knows? Maybe he don't.
I mean,
it's fantastic.
It's one of my favorite
It is one of the best bits of the film, definitely. It's it's just classic Gary Oldman just going full on. It's the sort of thing that not many actors could pull off. It makes him weirder. It makes him a kind of a weirder character that he's white in this black world, and in this, he's living as if he's, this kind of classic black stereotype.
I think this film's very messy. It's got a lot of weird little tangents, he's one of which it feels like he should have been the primary antagonist throughout, really, but he's killed off very soon.
He comes back at the end trying to get him back or something.
Yeah. But obviously it sets up the main focus of the plot, because the guy's got a shitload of cocaine that Christian Slater's like, oh, I love that.
He steals it accidentally.
Yeah.
But then
I was going to say, is Christian Slater's character even about cocaine? From what you've described, it doesn't.
No. She's like, well, we can sell this and start a new life.
But this is when it kicks gear into Tarantino's other mode, which is the sort of insider Hollywood kind of film. I mean, basically, they run off with the cocaine and they go to see his dad briefly. He's got this estranged father, at which point the film stops dead for a few scenes. And initially it's kind of like, what is all this? But it does kind of pay off and add a bit of gravitas. But again, it just feels like a bit of a messy tangent. I don't know what Tarantino's relationship with his dad's like, but I mean, it feels very... I don't know, it's weird. Like, the dad kisses her at one point and they keep talking about how she tastes like a peach, and that's a sort of weird underlying misogynist, like, undertones that I think were probably just more prevalent in the 90s. Because that's it, there's a lot of stuff like that in this film, and characters talking about black people and so on. And it's like, this guy, like, these are meant to be the heroes of this film. They're not... I don't think we're meant to think, oh, that's a bit of a twatty thing to say, and I mean, it's just, the whole thing's very messy, but I think it's quite entertaining, and it's got good ideas in it. Brad Pitt plays this guy's roommate in LA, or towards LA, and that's one of the great Brad Pitt performances, if you ask me.
You seen them? Mm-hmm. They staying here?
No, they're staying at the Safari Motel Inn. Safari Motel.
How do you know that? I mean, have you been over there?
No. Well, they were here, and they said that they were going to go there. Then they went. Hey, you want to watch some TV or something? They might be back here.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, you take care. I might be back.
Yeah, man. Okay, be cool. You condescend me, man. I'll fucking kill you, man.
My major problem with this film is that the beginning is really shit. It doesn't set up these characters well at all. The ending is really shit because it's just a nonsense bloodbath. Yeah. The middle bit I found fairly engaging. It was sort of a bit of plot, a bit of story. I could see them going from one thing to the next. Yeah. Not that it was a particularly great, but I was okay with that. And then my main problem with it was that the main character, Christian Slater's character, is just so completely unlikable. Yeah. A murderer just straight up decides he's going to murder someone and does so. And the fact that she still likes him, the fact that he sort of shouts at her very aggressively until she says, I love you, that sort of thing. It is a really creepy, horrible person. And I don't know why we're supposed to be on his side.
We spoke about how Tarantino did not come across very well as a young man. This character is clearly him, written on the screen, and it's surprising how little Tony Scott cleaned him up and made him into a more likable character, because it's almost like he went the other way and he's like, okay, I want you to actually study Tarantino, Christian Slater, and really get into the skin of him.
I don't think Tony Scott's a particularly amazing director. He doesn't do anything interesting with this, and the ending is straight out of John Woo. It's like watching a Hong Kong film, which I'm sure that was what was in Tarantino's head. But it's there's a few nice character moments, like with the character who's connecting them to the producer, and they go on the roller coaster and all that. It's like, that's quite a neat little idea to make that a bit more engaging. And
I love the producer's PA as well. I think he's a great performance, great little character. Just this sort of slimy, snivelling guy.
It's very broad, and Michael Rappaport just doesn't really add anything. I'm not really sure why his character's there at all. Yeah, because it doesn't do anything.
Yeah. But I think it's all right, and I certainly think it's an improvement from Reservoir Dogs, personally. So for me, it's a 7 out of 10.
Well, I give it a 6.
All right. That's fair.
Which I think is very fair.
I'll give it a 6.5, seeing as I've not seen it. And fuck you, not allowing your 0.5s or 0.2s or whatnot.
I think that's fair. I think that's about right.
We didn't mention that Christopher Walken comes in and steals.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of Tarantino regulars in this one. Samuel L. Jackson's got a tiny little role.
Crackhead L. Jackson turns up.
It's definitely it seems like it's a building block film. Paving the way for, as you said earlier, greater things.
Okay, so I mean, this is why we're here now, having this discussion. Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, I mean, definitely Pulp Fiction is something we could do an episode on its own. Mm-hmm. We're going to have to limit ourselves a little bit, but hopefully there's plenty to talk about. Dan, you didn't really say much about True Romance because you haven't seen it, so why don't you lead us into Pulp Fiction?
All right, well, the first, I'm going to, again, I got a bit obsessed with talking about the distortion of time in it. Literally, the first thing that I wrote was just that it's sort of like a film jigsaw puzzle, and I don't think we'd really had this before.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit overstated. When I was watching it again just recently, like I say, I haven't seen it for years. Just watched it last week. Mm-hmm. It's not complicated. It's like there's essentially two stories with some tangents. You know, you got Jules and Vincent, and then Bruce Willis.
If you watch the film in chronological order, do you think that takes anything away from Pulp Fiction of the way it is, the way the story is told? Because we're saying it's not that complicated, but obviously you have to be actually watching it in order for it to not be complicated.
You could. This is a film that could be edited anyway. You could end on Bruce Willis riding off into the sunset, and it would be as satisfying,
iconic.
Well, what my thoughts about this were, and this is kind of quite a broad point, but I'll make it now anyway. I think I would prefer this film and could have done this film if it was like a day in the life of Jules and Vincent, and you see these two hitmen and you see what they're doing. The whole Bruce Willis story, that whole storyline, take it out. I don't need that, and I'd have an hour and a half film with these two characters, and you see them going through things, and then maybe the Uma Thurman storyline is a flashback, or it's like, oh, Vincent decides to tell Jules the story about when he took out the boss's wife, and then we flash back, perhaps, and then you could have something else with Jules where he has a flashback or something if you want to increase the runtime or whatever. But basically, just seeing them go through this day in chronological order would have been perfectly good for me, and I would have liked that film. Not to say I didn't like this film, but I think I would have worked.
So did you not enjoy the storyline of Bruce Willis? Did you not find that interesting or captivating, like in the same way?
I didn't dislike it. I think it's very different style to the other one, and I also think they're not connected at all. Obviously, Marcellus Wallace is the connection, but I don't think they're connected in any way, story-wise. And I think that's deliberate choice. He's telling like Pulp Fiction, a couple of different stories here, there, but. That's two separate films, and it could have worked as two separate films. I would have liked one more than the other, but there you go.
I've always felt like it did feel very detached, actually. I agree with you there, that subplot. Or that strand, I suppose, would be more accurate. It's like the first time Bruce Willis pops up, I'm always like, oh yeah, I forgot about him being in this film.
This happening.
Yeah, I forgot this whole bit's in it. But having said that, I really enjoy his story, and I like it. I think there's probably a pretty strong argument for chopping any of the storylines out of the film just to kind of make everything run a bit smoother. I think Samuel L. Jackson's the only one who's cemented in place and couldn't possibly be removed. But
this is what I mean. I think there's two stories here. I think you've got Jules and Vincent.
Yeah.
And Tim Roth and Amanda Plummer's storyline is a part of that.
Yeah.
The Uma Thurman storyline is a part of that.
Yeah.
And then you've got the Butch, the boxer, and his storyline. It's two storylines that are kind of interwoven. But that's why I would have liked, Jules and Vincent have this really weird day, and it's like this thing happens that Jules thinks is a miracle and it affects him, and then that when something else really bad happens where they get held up in the diner, that affects the way he's behaved. Yeah. And that's exactly what we see. I mean, that is what happens. I'm just saying that you take Butch out of that storyline and it would have just flowed smoothly, no problem.
Okay, so if you take Butch out of that then how... I understand obviously that there are other parts of the film where this character I'm about to say does develop, but one of the big things in Butch's story is showing and exposing Marcellus Wallace for something more than just being this crime lord. And without that story, where do we get that development from? Where do we get that character growth for
I don't know about that. In Jules and Vincent's story, he can just be the sort of nebulous crime lord. We never even see his face. They're doing some sort of weird package for him. Like we don't need to know. He's the power.
I was going to say, I don't think it adds anything to their story that we do know more about him, honestly. Because
I don't think we know any more about him. All we see of him is that if someone does bad by him, he'll fuck them up. And we knew that anyway.
Well, yeah, true.
We also we learn that there's some semblance of honor, I guess you'd call it, to his character. The way that Bruce Willis and he kind of
he does right by Bruce Willis as he
come to terms with one another after going through an ordeal together. I think that does develop him a bit, but I don't think it develops him in a way that has any impact on the other storylines.
The other guys, yeah. No, right.
I mean, for me, you were talking about with Reservoir Dogs being a film that you came to and got you into film and so on. I think this was for me. I think certainly nowadays, most boys get to age 15 and then watch Pulp Fiction and start quoting "bad motherfucker" this and blah blah blah, and you know, I was no exception to that. And it was one of these early films I watched when I was getting into cinema that really made me sit up and think, yeah, no, films are pretty cool.
Yeah, I was the same. Yeah. If we think of Tarantino as being particularly skilled in a certain type of dialogue, this is probably the best example of that.
Yeah,
and
something he's kind of let go a little bit later on, not for a bad reason, but like he's writing dialogue that's suitable for the position. But in this, like the opening scene of Reservoir Dogs, it's like, this is classic Tarantino dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Jules and Vincent chatting away, all that.
And the difference for me here is that I really do think each instance of it here does develop the character, perhaps more specifically the dynamic and relationship between the characters. In Reservoir Dogs, it's always more of a monologue when you get these tangents and people talking about stuff. In True Romance, it's always more of a monologue. It's, oh, hasn't Clarence got an interesting opinion? In Pulp Fiction, it's, look at the interplay between these two. It's, you know, John Travolta's going on about McDonald's, but then Samuel L. Jackson's, you know, listening to him and they'll get the hell out and what? And you get a real sense for who they are.
It doesn't seem like throwaway nonsense.
Yeah, Uma Thurman and him are bonding over this stuff, and you get a real sense for their chemistry together because of it. So I think the difference and why it works for me here is that I really think it does complement the story in a way that isn't the case for me with Reservoir Dogs. Do you know what they call a Big Mac in China, Dan?
Go on, so what do they call a Big Mac in China?
I'm going to pronounce it wrong. Ju Wu Ba, which apparently literally translates as giant, not tyrant.
Good.
Very good.
Okay.
Do you know what they call a Big Mac in India, Alan?
Veggie Mac, because they don't eat beef.
You're on the right lines. Apparently it's called the Maharaja Mac, and it's made with chicken.
It is called the Maharaja Mac. I've eaten it. It is spicy, and you will spend a lot of time on the toilet after eating it.
That sounds fantastic.
My first note was basically in one scene, in the opening scene, or really in the scene where they confront the three young men in the apartment. That scene invents Samuel L. Jackson. Samuel L. Jackson as the sort of Samuel L. Jackson persona that we all know and love, rather than necessarily him actually as a person. Just in that one simple scene, he's reciting Bible verse. It's just boom, he's there.
And you know that Bible verse scene?
Yeah,
that was written for Harvey Keitel's character in From Dusk Till Dawn, and the script sat on a shelf so long that Tarantino was like, I'm just going to have that for my own film over here, Pulp Fiction.
Would it have had the bit where he said, "Oh, this is some crazy shit I say before I kill someone"?
Probably not,
because Harvey Keitel's character didn't really do that.
But that Bible passage is like predominantly bullshit. The first half of it's real, and then it kind of turns into some riff on a 1976 karate movie.
What a surprise!
So it's not actually, it's just Tarantino just being Tarantino.
That's fair. I'm all right with that. That's okay.
Yeah,
but just generally in that, this film for me really came alive whenever Samuel L. Jackson was on screen. Mm-hmm. And the flip side of that is that I was less bothered when he wasn't on screen. So, that's about 60% of the film. All the Bruce Willis stuff, which I'm not saying it's bad, but and the Uma Thurman storyline. Just when Samuel L. Jackson was there, it was like, yes, I'm in. I'm totally involved.
I really enjoyed the interactions of Uma Thurman and John Travolta, though. There's some iconic scenes that those two have together in that film.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, I don't dislike it, but it's just Jackson just brings something else to it.
Yeah, I agree. When Samuel L. Jackson comes on, it's like, all right, this film's just turned it up to 11. Like, this is really fucking good. And the other stuff's just really good.
I've got a big problem with the whole Butch storyline. I don't know if you want to go into that now, but I've got bigger problems with that.
Go on. Let's deal with that bit. And then
let's open it.
Well, basically, my major problem with it is that it's not a well-plotted story. Just things just happen like randomly. And the fact that he runs into Marcellus Wallace just by pure chance is okay. I'll accept this kind of one coincidence.
Yeah. To make a point.
Yeah.
Almost.
But then the whole Zed and rape thing is just completely out of nowhere. It's not a very realistic situation. It's sort of like just, it's such a weird, like, right, what am I going to do with this? Maybe they all become vampires. That'll make sense. It's such a weird story progression that has no meaning and it's just a means to an end. And I don't like that. I think it's bad writing. I think it's bad storytelling.
I think it's all very much action or nothing with his storyline. It's like we're either doing something big or being really quiet. Like,
I mean, I agree. The film takes some weird left turns. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's kind of part of the point of the film is that it is just weird shit happens.
But that's what I mean. Him just driving away and Marcellus Wallace happens to be there is a coincidence that I can go with. But then just these new characters that are just, what's going on here? Oh yeah, they've got a gimp in the basement. What? It doesn't make any sense. There's no reason behind any of it.
Mm-hmm. A coincidence that gets you into trouble is fine. A coincidence that gets you out of trouble is bad writing. And I don't, with the exception of perhaps, as we say, John Travolta's death scene, there aren't any coincidences that really massively help the characters. Bruce Willis and Thingy, it's completely coincidental. They stumble into that bizarre sex dungeon, but then that gets them into further trouble, and it's Bruce Willis's character and his decisions that he makes that gets him out of that and manages to rescue himself and make amends with the other guy. So
it's all about closure for Butch, isn't it? That's the entire reason that scene exists.
I think it's perfectly fine, personally.
I have no problem with a situation where they get themselves into trouble and Bruce Willis actually helps him and therefore they find some sort of peace. The way that it's done is just weird.
No,
and
I think it's
not
what you just said. I think he finds some common ground with this guy that he's wronged.
But if they'd just been in a fight and they'd stumbled into, say, for example, rival gang territory of Marcellus Wallace, and so they capture them and they're going to kill Marcellus Wallace because he's a rival.
Then it would be a much more boring film. Less interesting.
Well, why? No, because he's still under the same threat, and then Bruce Willis escapes.
Because gangs. I've seen a million films about gangs. I've never seen a film about a weird sex dungeon that kidnaps people.
Well, that's because it doesn't exist, and it's not a real thing, and it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but what if it did?
Well, make a film about that then, but don't just drop it in a film that's about other things.
The bit for me that really feels like what is going on is when Marvin gets shot in the head. Marvin, of course, played by Phil Lamar in a rare live-action role. Phil Lamar does voices on Futurama and other cartoons.
Sweet gorilla of Manila!
Yeah.
I just feel like that whole sequence should have come a lot earlier in the film. It comes so late in the film, but it's so kind of comparatively low stakes compared to some of what we've seen, and silly, that it just doesn't quite fit there for me, personally. I don't know. I mean, it's one of the most iconic bits in the film. It's obviously where Tarantino crowbars himself in, and it's one of the more cringy bits of acting he's ever done as Jimmy.
I know what my wife buys, Jules. My wife buys shit.
But I do like the dynamic between him and Samuel Jackson there. The way that Samuel Jackson's playing that character dynamic, it's like, okay, he's my friend, but I can't, like, I realise what I'm pushing here.
I also...
And then you got John Travolta's character is just like being an arsehole about it. It's like, do you mind? We've literally brought a corpse into his house. Do you want to just play along here? Yeah. This scene where, you got Harvey Keitel comes in quite an iconic, like, such an iconic scene that I saw an advert recently for insurance with this
Julia, Winston Wolfe.
Yeah?
You were on your way to Marcia's hen party when you took a hit from a couple of wise guys.
Nightmare.
Call Direct Line. They'll arrange a hire car.
Oh,
What about us? Are you with Direct Line? No. Then on your bike, Buster.
Like, he comes in and he's like, pretty please, buy fucking insurance. He's like doing that. It's like, it's sad, really, but,
I mean, look, he's not above cleaning up corpses and brain matter. He's never been doing particularly high-class work, so... You know what I realised this time watching the film, and I'd never realised this before, which is probably a good indication of how long it's been since I watched the film and the age I was when I first watched this.
Go on.
That's Steve Buscemi in the diner scene serving them. I had no idea.
Yeah.
But it's so obviously him, but like...
And he brings so much to such a small part because it's such a waiter who's not just a waiter, but in a character waiter.
Buddy
You've
Holly,
got to really sell that. And he just cannot be arsed. He's just blatantly a waiter going, yeah, what do you want? Right, fuck off. But because he's in character doing it, it makes it even more obvious. I really like that. I like that it just brought something to it in such a small part.
Yeah, that was nice.
Well, the Uma Thurman storyline is, John Travolta's character has to take her out and just keep her occupied while her husband's away.
Yeah.
Really nice character dynamics between them. There's not a lot happens, and the sort of plot all comes right at the end, where after she accidentally snorts heroin.
Yeah.
John Travolta plays a sort of spaced out junkie quite well. Why do you think that is? Should we talk about John Travolta quickly, because this was a renaissance of his career?
Oh yeah. I mean, he's the one that people point to every time Tarantino casts a Mike Myers or a Kurt Russell or whoever. It's always, look, he's doing a John Travolta.
But and this, I don't think John Travolta's particularly great in this.
Yeah, I think he was just cast in a cool role, and everyone.
Yeah, it's a great role.
I really enjoy him in this film,
and this really relaunched his career fully for a good 10 years. Like, he got a decade out of this, and then it sort of went wrong again. But
Tarantino offered him the lead in From Dusk Till Dawn. He basically said, "Look, I'm going to make one of these two scripts I've written. Which one do you want?" And he was like, "Well, let's do the proper film."
Right?
Yeah,
fair.
probably for the best that you did that. I think it's interesting to imagine a world in which he chose the other one. I think John Travolta would have gone on to be one of those comic book convention signing autograph B-movie kings.
Yeah.
But on the other side, George Clooney as Vincent Vega probably would have worked really well.
Oh man, that would have been phenomenally cool. Ooh.
Maybe him and Samuel Jackson are sort of too much the same kind of cool for that to quite work.
Yeah, you know what? It might be it'd be so cool that it would just like come out the other side and it just wouldn't work. Too much cool.
Yeah. What else? Uma Thurman. This, another one who's kind of, this really brought her up into mainstream a bit more.
Well, her and Tarantino became very close, collaborators until stuff we'll go into and Kill Bill kind of ruined it, and they're not really on the best of terms anymore. But
the major thing we haven't talked about is where Tim Roth and Amanda Plummer are playing this weird couple who hold up a restaurant.
Yeah.
And this gives us a conclusion to the essentially the Jewels story.
It struck me. I only realised it on this viewing. It's really odd, but it's very clearly a different take of the scene at the start and then the beginning.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, she says completely different words. Yeah.
So what's that about? It goes from the any of you motherfuckers move and I'll motherfucking execute every last one of you. And then it becomes I'll execute every one of you motherfuckers or something. It's like
I notice there's a significant change in the line, isn't there? Like
that's got to be a weird intentional Tarantino thing, right? I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was just the nicest take from that separate angle and they fucked up. But I don't know. It just seems like a weird Tarantino wanted to create an intentional continuity error because he saw it in a shit film when he was younger, and I don't know.
Yes, yes, that's probably right. But yeah, it's the conclusion, and it's all about he's having a bit of a weird day,
midlife crisis, really.
but yeah, they're kind of having a moment of enlightenment, let's say, and so it changes the way that he deals with it. And I think it's nice. It's a very good tense scene.
I think it's
works
wonderful,
all right.
yeah. And the fact that they make it very clear that he could shoot his way out of this and basically execute these two idiots, and he because he's got the gun under the table, and he purposely doesn't do that and takes the less easy route for him. I think it's great.
Yeah, exactly. Because the less easy route. That's it. He's kind of trying to find a peaceful route.
A moment of growth, isn't it?
In his own way, yeah. And I do like it where he gives the guy his money, and John Travolta's character goes, "If you've given that money, I'm going to shoot him on principle."
I really like that. Yeah.
Which is good. But the beauty of that moment is it really highlights that they are in total control here, even though Amanda Plummer's still got the gun out and everything. They are in control of this situation.
Yeah.
And John Travolta's still of a mindset, well, let's just kill these twats and walk away.
I think he's the voice of the audience there, frankly. I think Tarantino very rightly knows that you're sat there going, just shoot the prick. And then so he acknowledges it and then carries on explaining what he's doing. And I think it's great. I love this film. I think this film's fantastic. Like I was, of all the films I had to rewatch, other than From Dusk Till Dawn, which I've seen so many times, I really was kind of dreading this one because I've probably seen it the most out of Tarantino's filmography, and it was just a bit like, oh god, again. And then I do this quite a lot where I put it on and a few minutes in I'm sold. I'm like, no, this is brilliant.
Yeah, it was definitely, for me, it was the whole Bruce Willis storyline didn't engage me as much. I not want to say that I disliked it, but that definitely what came through on this watch.
I think I totally get where you're coming from with that, and I think you've made some very valid points, but I just enjoy his subplot so much that I don't care that it doesn't really tie in as well. So, yeah, no, you're right.
Well, the whole thing that makes up for Butcher's story for me is Christopher Walken's whole bit of I just love like retelling that and discussing that with people, so like just how serious he has to talk about this guy hiding a watch up his ass for 5 years.
Come on down, do your impression.
Up his ass.
Up his ass.
Walking down the road. Yeah, no, great.
One other thing I want to mention: this film, it won the Palme d'Or. Which is somewhat controversial because it's such a sort of
enjoyable
American film. Because it had such mainstream success.
The Palme d'Or is usually for like mental Taiwanese films that don't make any sense.
Well, not really. I mean,
the few I've seen. I think this is the only Palme d'Or winner I've seen that I've enjoyed.
Well, just to put it in context, Barton Fink won it a few years ago. Coen Brothers film, Wild at Heart won it.
Ugh, yeah, exactly there. Fucking mental bullshit film.
Yeah. So it's kind of not it's not a kind of. Well, it was also nominated for Oscars, and those two don't necessarily always correlate. But also, it's not. This is a sort of film that loads of people went to see. It appeals to 25-year-old men, and that is not the usual Palme d'Or kind of stuff.
This was a real fucking definitive game changer of cinema. I mean, it's the culmination of things leading up to it. It didn't come out of nowhere, but this is one of the seminal works of film, like, of all time, in terms of cultural significance and in terms of influence on the landscape of cinema. I mean, I'm not surprised.
And I think it's a good example of how this film still had, with Tarantino, an indie film feel to it.
Yeah.
And that Tarantino could be the kind of American indie darling for a long time. And kind of, it didn't become that. He's gone a lot more mainstream, even though he does retain a lot of those aspects, and he does things that are not mainstream, but he maintains a mainstream audience. And that's a very special skill. So, yeah, there's just a sort of an unusual bit of a sort of film history there. And I think it does say a lot about how this film was received, in the fact that it was so critically acclaimed, but at the same time, people... and obviously, whenever anything's big, people will rally against it, and particularly for violence and drug use and all that sort of thing that was apparently a lot more important back then.
Anyway, should we rate it?
Yes.
Come on then, Alan.
I know I've kind of been a bit of a voice of dissension here, but I gave it 9 out of 10. So I think that should, but I think retrospectively that should sort of justify what I'm saying, in the sense of, I did enjoy it, but I was like, I think this could be a second film completely. And I probably wouldn't, if you just showed me the Bruce Willis storyline film, I probably wouldn't like that as much. But that Jules and Vincent story is a 10 out of 10 for me.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of, that really does a lot of things for me. And the other side of it just sort of distracts for it.
I think we've got the same kind of opinion, but we're just coming to it from either side. Because, again, like, if they were two separate films, the Jules and Vincent for me would be a 10 out of 10, but the Bruce Willis would probably be like a 9 out of 10. But for me, it doesn't drag it down. But overall, for me, this is a 10. I think this is a truly wonderful film. So it's quite a big leap up for me from Reservoir Dogs. Daniel?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with a 9. It is a leap from Reservoir Dogs. It is more captivating for me. The storyline, the dialogue for me personally is more snappy, more authentic. It actually means more.
We are shaking up our Diminishing Returns top 10 leaderboard. Fight Club last week, and now this. Ooh-wee. Calvin's going to be fuming. So, Natural Born Killers then, same year. We need to mention it, but I don't really have anything to say other than I don't think it's that great, and I don't really consider it part of Tarantino's career, really, because all he has is a story credit.
Yeah, and I understand the script was significantly altered.
Yeah, that's the thing.
From what he wrote.
To me, it doesn't feel like his work when you watch it. True Romance feels like his work. From Dusk Till Dawn feels like his work. This one doesn't, to me.
I can see Tarantino in there. Well, I know what you mean. Yeah, it feels very altered. But it's an interesting film from quite an arty point of view, and it's an interesting film from a filmmaking point of view. That sort of because there are a lot of things in there that are really interesting directorial kind of flourishes that you're not going to see very often. Certainly not in a film of this. It wasn't that mainstream, but a film of this nature with this kind of budget. Not a particularly enjoyable film in any way, or
Right.
very good either. I did rate it. Hang on, let me look it up before.
Well, I've looked it up and I've given it a 6 out of 10 on IMDb, but I think I saw it around the same time as Reservoir Dogs, and that was me sort of being too scared to give it a lower score because people like it. So,
Well, I gave it a 6 as well. Actually, I just watched it the other day. So, and Juliette Lewis is fantastic in it. She's always fantastic. Woody Harrelson actually is pretty good in it as well, and it was very much a deliberate kind of. But that was a deliberate stepping away from his usual type. That was kind of the whole point of casting him. He was the guy out of Cheers. He was a sitcom guy.
okay. Shall we move on to one of the lesser known, more often forgotten Tarantino directorial efforts, and 3 other people directorial efforts?
Yeah,
4 Rooms,
which I just watched for the first time.
Yeah, this was the one feature on this that I hadn't seen before, that I watched specifically for this whole series of podcast episodes we're doing. Should we start off with a little game? Okay. Can you name for me films in which Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez have shared director duties?
Sin City.
Sin City, correct. Point to Alan. Tarantino, quote-unquote, guest directed a scene.
The Grindhouse thing, if that counts as
Oh,
one film.
shit.
Yes.
Yeah, that does. That's what I was going to go for.
Grindhouse, yes, of course, was made up of...
You bastard, Alan!
It's basically an anthology containing Death Proof and Planet Terror.
Spy Kids?
No.
Did he do something on that or something?
I mean, there's an obvious one we haven't mentioned.
Well, this one that we're talking about, 4 Rooms.
4 Rooms.
Yeah.
They are 2 of the 4 directors in it. And now this is one that's quite interesting trivia that I didn't know until I read about it the other day.
Go on then.
The Jimmy Dimmick scenes in Pulp Fiction were directed by an uncredited Robert Rodriguez because Tarantino was busy being an actor.
Interesting. I did not know
No,
that.
I didn't know that either.
There you go. Okay, little bonus game. The same, but with Eli Roth instead of Robert Rodriguez. There's 2 of them.
What they've directed together?
Tarantino and Eli Roth have both.
Eli Roth
them.
did one of the trailers in the Grindhouse thing.
He did Thanksgiving trailer for Grindhouse. That's one of these.
Did he direct something in Inglourious Bastards?
He did. He directed the little Nation's Pride film that they watch within the film.
Oh right, yeah.
Yeah.
So he was there, wasn't he?
Yeah. So there you go.
Well, I learned something new.
No, well done with that. Now let's see. So yeah, 4 Rooms.
Yeah.
My first note is, what the actual fuck is this? This is not what I expected at all.
Well, what were you expecting? Because all I knew about it, I just watched this for the first time the other day. I knew it was an anthology film. I've seen those sort of films before. They're always quite crap.
Yeah.
But this one had a bit more of a reason to actually hang them together. It had a kind of, that central character a bit more.
It didn't. But yeah. This is just a lot more screwball comedy, light-hearted than I was expecting.
Oh,
basically.
definitely, yeah.
That's what I found bizarre. It opens with a bizarre Pink Panther knockoff opening credits with Tim Roth's bellboy character animated.
It is really weird, actually. Yeah, it's a weird film. It's just got a weird vibe to it.
I've never seen Tim Roth give a bad performance before, but
it
is fucking cringy here. This is
it's...
I mean, it's because he's playing against type. It's because he's trying to do comedy, and he can't do it.
It is a really weird character, and it feels like, put a proper comedy actor into that and it would work.
Well, it was conceived of for Steve Buscemi, which would have worked, and for whatever reason, he didn't do it. Maybe he read the script.
Sense. Well, Steve Buscemi has worked with most of these I think all of these directors. Definitely worked with the two that we've heard of. And one of the others, because I looked him up.
But the thing is, I've never seen Tim Roth play a character that isn't just kind of himself before. I think that's why it just doesn't work here. He can't do it.
Well, that's
it's like he's playing fucking Mr. Bean. It's
cringy. He does it very. What he seems to be doing is very Stan Laurel. Actually, is a lot of Stan Laurel stuff in there. I assume that's a big influence in what he's doing. But yeah, it is physical comedy, and he's just not very good at it. He's not
trying to stress how British he is at times, but he's
and then not at other.
He's not the right kind of British for it as well. He's that kind of, he's down here. It just doesn't. Oh,
and it is a weird thing, and obviously there's 4 different stories with 4 different directors.
Well, should we rattle through them really quickly? Segment 1. Some utter load of bullshit from Alison Anders about some witches that are trying to do a spell.
No idea what that was supposed to be about. What was that saying?
They need his sperm, and it's just embarrassing. It's trying so hard to have like a director's stamp on it, and it does, but you come away thinking, well, they can't direct. Tim Roth gets raped by a witch.
Well, I don't know. He's definitely into it.
Yeah, because he's not into it, and then she casts a fucking hypnotic spell on him.
Oh, you're right, she does actually, yeah. She doesn't... I was thinking she just convinces him and seduces him, but... yeah, that's a good point, actually. It's
a bit weird. Madonna's in it.
Yeah, but it is a weird film. That short, I don't know what it's trying to say, I don't know what it's trying to achieve. I didn't know it was that difficult to make a short film.
I think it's meant to be funny, and it's just embarrassing.
I mean, it's not funny, so if that's what it's trying to do, it's...
The second segment is a lot more serious and less screwball and weird. And I guess the plot is a bit more obviously funny. Alexandre Rockwell directs the second one, and he goes into a room and there's this weird hostage situation, but then it might or might not be a weird sex game between a husband and wife, and you don't really know, and he's caught up in it, and he's held at gunpoint. I thought this was the best directed of the bunch, actually, in terms of the craftsmanship behind the camera, but it's boring.
The second one?
Fuck. Yeah.
Again, I came away from it going, don't know what they were trying to say with that, I don't know what the purpose of that was. That was definitely one where I was like, I wouldn't mind watching something by this director. I bet as an indie little films go, I bet they're interesting. Whereas the first one, I was like, I don't know who this is and I don't care.
Mm-hmm. Then segment 3, Robert Rodriguez's. I don't know about you, Alan. I think this is by far the highlight of the film. By far and away. It's the only segment that vaguely works.
The misbehavers.
This is like a precursor to Robert Rodriguez of Spy Kids and Shark Boy and Lava Girl.
Yeah.
It's him directing kids, being anarchic. It's it's not suitable. It's not a kid's film, but you can see the DNA of him that went on to want to make family films.
Yeah, and it's kind of unabashedly fun and silly, whereas the others are just kind of trying to be kooky. I don't know what they're trying to do.
It's contrived setup for the most ridiculous. Basically, this couple are like, we're going out, we want you to babysit the kids for us. Here's like $100 tip for you or whatever, as long as they're like looked after.
Yeah.
And then it's just like how they can get to those two coming home, and like the room's on fire and there's a dead hooker in the room, and one of the kids is drunk, and do you know what I mean? It's just bending over backwards to how they can manufacture that. But I quite like that.
But that's fine because
Exactly.
it works as a comedic construct.
So I thought this was all right, and Antonio Banderas is in it as the dad of the kids, and he's on typical comedy Antonio Banderas form. I quite like him.
And again, it works as a short because it's just
Exactly.
like, hey, we're just gonna have a bit of fun and be silly with this.
Yeah. And then finally, what everyone came to see, Tarantino closes out the film. Although there's a bit of wraparound, and I couldn't find anything on who directed the wraparound stuff.
No,
I did look,
because
because there's a whole bit where he phones up Kathy Griffin, who owns the hotel, and says, "I'm done it. I'm not working here anymore." And she's like, "Come on, just go see the room upstairs because it's this big, high-powered client from Hollywood, and we need to keep him happy, and then you can go." And she convinces him to. And the problem I had with this film as a whole is that there's no overarching story. None of this really goes anywhere. But anyway, segment 4, Tarantino. Tarantino basically plays himself, but now he's a film director. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. He's playing a film that, like, an up-and-coming new Hollywood star, director, writer. He's just made a film everyone loves, and he's rented out this hotel suite, and all his Hollywood mates are there. There's a woman walking around in bare feet. Bruce Willis is there for an uncredited cameo. Yeah, I mean, basically, the guy goes into the room. Tarantino's like, "Hey, can I offer you a tasty beverage?" And he's like, "Yeah. Well, this is the best tasty beverage in town." And then just talks at him for 20 minutes. Just nonsense. I don't know, Gilligan's Island, talking about old TV, doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, probably not even scripted. They just put a camera on him and he started.
Honestly, it is Tarantino as himself. Like, it is just him. You know that shot in that episode of Gilligan's Island where so and so comes to so and so, and people like Bruce Willis is like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah," just like, and it just leads to them doing this bet, and a guy's finger gets chopped off, and then Tim Roth walks out with a load of money, and that's the end. And there's no overarching plot. It's not funny.
The Tarantino segment, it does feel like a director who's going, "Oh, I'm making a short film, we'll do something a little bit fun." He kind of plays with a lot of long shots where moving the camera, like tracking shots and stuff. It feels like he's taking the opportunity to do something a little bit experimental, and it's very Tarantino dialogue.
It feels like he bashed it out very quickly as well. It doesn't feel like he sat down and thought about it like he does with most of his films. But the writing was not particularly good in this Tarantino segment. It's 20 minutes of unrelated setup for a very weak punchline, and that's it. It's a punchline. It's not a story. I was surprised at how bad this film was. I think it's shite, and I think it's quite remarkable that Tarantino has successfully managed to erase it from his filmography to the extent that he has, because you never see this one mentioned. It's really quite well hidden.
So what are your rankings on it, would you say, guys?
I would give it a 4.
Overall, I gave it a 5.
A 4 and a 5.
Yeah, it's weak.
Yeah.
Weak. Did you know, Alan, it was originally meant to be called 5 Rooms?
Okay, who was the 5th?
Can you guess?
Richard Linklater?
Spot on.
Oh! Got it.
That was very impressive. Yeah, Richard Linklater was...
But he's exactly the right generation with these guys. It's going to be him or Kevin Smith, basically.
Yeah.
And Kevin Smith was still a bit not quite there at this point. So,
right, From Dusk Till Dawn?
From Dusk Till Dawn, yes, which, of all the films that Tarantino's written but not directed, this is probably the one that feels most faithful to the script.
This feels like so close to a Tarantino film, just in general as well. I mean, yeah. This was a film, I've always quite liked this film. I've probably watched this the most out of Tarantino's filmography, honestly.
Yeah.
Because, it's like, I think I watched it one year with you guys for Halloween, because it was one of the kind of comedy horror films I happen to have to hand.
Yeah, I do.
It's just a nice, easy watch, and I've gone back to it again and again as a result. Therefore, I really, more than anything, wasn't looking forward to going back to rewatching this one, but I thought I'd better get through it. And again, put it on 5 minutes in love with it. I forgot how much I love this film. Every time I watch it, I think I come away appreciating it all the more, because it's a weird structure. people criticize that. It's you get halfway into the film before the genre changes altogether and it becomes a vampire movie. Have you seen this one, Dan?
Mm-hmm. I have, yeah. Yeah, I've not seen it for a little while, but yeah, I have seen this one.
And people will criticize that as bad structure, but I think it's such a clearly intended rug from under your feet moment that I think it's fine. And I think tonally the film stays the same.
But that's what makes it fun as well, the fact that they can just throw that out.
It's a genre comedy up until the point where the vampires show up. You know, it's got violence in it, and so tonally it doesn't really shift gears. It just adds a supernatural element halfway through, but I don't know.
Just as an overview of my feelings is I don't like that switch, but it's not because of the switch, and I think that's as a device it's quite an interesting thing. Like it's just like pull the rug out from under you, boom, look, with something here you wasn't expecting that. My problem with it is that I'm really enjoying that first half of the film, and then the second half of the film it becomes like, oh, we're fighty, and that's just I'm not bothered about that, and it does it well for that sort of thing, but it's just I think it's more of a personal taste thing. I'm just not bothered about that.
For me, I think it does wonders to I think both halves of the film do wonders to prop each other up. I think the first half of the film is very good, but I think that the fact that you know there's vampires on the way and it's going to become this silly film makes you all the more forgiving of the cliches of the genre that it falls into. It's doing very kind of cliched, these two criminal brothers on the run from the law. And because you know it's operating within a different confines to just being that all the way through, you kind of forgive it certain things that you might not if it wasn't that all the way through. And this is, I mean, this was a real collaboration between Tarantino and Rodriguez. Like, the two really did, you know, more than, oh, he wrote it, I directed it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Tarantino was going to direct this film himself. It was going to be one of his films, like, through and through in his official numbered canon. But he wanted to focus on his acting, which is why Robert Rodriguez did it.
And Rodriguez in this, he's got just the right sense of fun to make this work.
Yeah, and we've been skirting around like Tarantino as an actor, and I think this is an example of why he can be a good actor. He's cast perfectly. He's playing this.
This is the high point of his acting career.
I don't have
easily
any issues with him in this because, like you said, he does fit better in this universe.
Yeah. He's cast correctly. I get the impression Robert Rodriguez is directing him very well and knows which takes to use and that sort of thing. And I think he's great as this kind of unhinged brother character who is a great dynamic. George Clooney's Seth Gecko loves his brother, but his brother's a fucking liability, gets him into trouble, and that plays out throughout the film.
And it also works on the level of, like, even an immoral character such as Seth Gecko sees his brother's immorality as a different kind. It's like in prison, the sex perverts are a different type of criminal, and they're shunned. And it's that kind of feel. But the character and the way Tarantino plays it is actually really good, and the way it's done, it's because it's not just a creepy guy who's like, oh, I like that. It's like you actually see from his point of view that he's not right in the head. He's seeing things that aren't happening. He's like he's really completely encompassed by these things, rather than he's just a bit of a creepy bastard. It's really nicely done, actually.
I would honestly point to this as the first clear sign of Tarantino growing as a filmmaker, because this is the first sign of his self-awareness. It might be down to Rodriguez, but I think it's probably him writing this part. He's playing on his public perception, how people saw him as this creepy guy who's into feet. So he's leaning into it and playing up to it, and it works. The film is all the better for it. But yeah, I just think this is a great film. Like the opening scene where you've got this policeman going in for his daily shit in the little truck stop, and then, you know, turns out they're in the middle of a hostage situation that's just been walked into, and the geckos are like, what the fuck are you doing? Get rid of him. And it's brilliant. And then, you know, you've got this tense dynamic, turns into a shootout. You get your violence and action in that set the tone for later.
Yep.
It plays really well. You establish the fact that this character is a liability, that these characters are kind of in this moral grey area. Well, no, not even moral grey. They're bad guys.
And I think a very, very crucial element to this film working is George Clooney.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Not just that he's obviously a fantastic actor, but making that character who is really evil and nasty piece of work just likable.
Yeah.
In just because of that George Clooney charisma. In the way we talked about like how Brad Pitt can do that. There's not many actors who could have made that character work in the way that it needs to work.
Yeah.
It's the fact that you do like him actually makes you feel quite nasty.
Yeah, it does, yeah. And I don't know, I think, because obviously what they go through at the end of the film when the vampires come out and start killing people is, it's such an ordeal, you're quite forgiving of things up until that point. But, and we've touched on it, but the other highlight here is Harvey Keitel, who is... I think he's fantastic in the role here. He plays this uptight, nerdy preacher. It's the classic thing of the preacher who's lost his faith and doesn't believe in God. But then, obviously, these vampires come out, and it's like, oh shit, like, hell is real, demons exist. I guess I believe in God again.
I need to sort my life out.
Yeah, and they do this fantastic, action movie, Bruce Campbell-esque, badass, bit at the end where he's shouting Bible verses and they're attacking with holy water. And I think the finale of this film is fantastic. I think it plays so well. It's such fantastic horror comedy stuff. I really, really love this film. This is one I can just go back to again and again and just enjoy. I think the tone is perfect. It's funny. It's exciting. It's an interesting film. It pushes ideas of like narrative structure and filmmaking rules. I think it gets away with it. It's incredibly well written, like ignoring that big structural thing, just the way certain character dynamics and perspectives and the way things are shifted. It's great.
Great, and a real.
This film made Clooney as well. We should add he got Batman off the back of this.
Oh, certainly in film terms, yeah.
Yeah, this launched him from ER. Tarantino had just directed a couple of episodes of ER, which is where they met, I believe.
Yes.
Oh, really? Yeah, so that's... I suspect we'll do an episode on that.
Yeah, because there are sequels I've never watched that are famously bad.
Some very cheap, sort of low-budget knockoff sequels.
Oh, yeah, so I just wanted to touch on... We've spoken about Tarantino's infamous foot fetish, but if I recall correctly, Alan, you have this particular...
not exactly, and definitely not. It's so notable watching Tarantino's films how often women's feet are in his mouth. But how often is just focusing on feet.
Was it your house, Dan, that Alan was at, and you'd left a sock on the floor, and he asked you to put it away because it was turning him on?
Yeah, it was.
It wouldn't have been a man's sock. Come on, what do you think I am, a pervert?
I lived with some women, so...
Oh, that's all right.
Oh, God.
Actually, but that's the weird thing is, I think I'm more into socks than feet. I don't know if that's weird.
I thought you were more...
I get that. I'm more into corsets and torsos, so I totally understand that. Do you know how From Dusk Till Dawn came about? Tarantino I think it was one of the first films he was paid to write.
Oh, really? So it wasn't just a spec script?
No, so Robert Kurtzman, who is a name you might know, he's a big name in horror makeup, he did the makeup in Reservoir Dogs for free for the air scene, on the condition that Tarantino write this film based on an idea he'd had, so that his special effects company could have like a showcase of their abilities. And I mean, if there's one thing I'm not a big fan of in this film, it is the transformation effects, that kind of Buffy the Vampire Slayer style morphing.
Yeah, it's very TV, isn't it? Yeah, and sort of 90s TV. Yeah,
but I guess the makeup's pretty good, and certainly the actual practical effects are great.
Yeah.
This is talking about the cast as well, like we did with Reservoir Dogs. This is a film that's elevated by its cast. You've got... We've already spoken about the core people, but then you've got, Cheech Marin as 3 different characters.
Alright, pussy, 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 come on in, pussy lovers! Here at the Titty Twister, we're slashing pussy in half! Give us an offer on our best selection of pussy! This is a pussy blowout! Alright, we got white pussy, black pussy, Spanish pussy, yellow pussy, we got hot pussy, cold pussy, we got wet pussy, we got smelly pussy, we got hairy pussy, bloody pussy, we got snapping pussy, we got silk pussy, velvet pussy, nalga hide pussy, even got horse pussy, dog pussy, chicken pussy. Come on, you want pussy? Come on in, pussy lovers. If we don't got it, you don't want it. Come on in, pussy lovers.
Yeah. Great, you really get your value out of him.
Exactly.
I can't believe Antonio Banderas didn't turn up at some point.
Yeah.
It's
and then you've just got like this cavalcade of horror B-movie legends in the bar, the Titty Twister, Tom Savini, Danny Trejo, Fred Williamson. It's fantastic.
Not the best actors.
No, but that's almost your hint. Like, this is about to turn into a B-movie horror film.
Yeah. Although I actually think Danny Trejo is a great actor. But yeah, you're right. It's a B-movie film. That a B-movie feel to it. That's exactly correct. Because it doesn't feel like that at first. And then it kind of becomes that as soon as you get into the Titty Twister.
They could have slapped some fake, degrading film effect over this and put it out as half of Grindhouse. Like, it's... Yeah. One more quick comment. You know the arguably the best line in the film, the classic "I have a wife" joke is.
And which
joke?
What it is?
I'm not gonna drain you completely. You'll be my slave. Because I don't think you're worthy of human blood. You'll feed on the blood of stray dogs. You'll be my footstool. And at my command, you lick the dog shit from my boot heel. Ooh. Since you'll be my dog, your new name will be Spud. Welcome to slavery.
No thanks. I already had a wife.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently George Clooney improvised that, and it was supposed to be like Robert Rodriguez wasn't even planning to leave it in the film, but the trailer people put it in the marketing, and it became like this huge popular line. So he was like, I've got to leave it in now because people will be upset if it's not there. Alan, what would you rate it?
I gave it 8.
Okay. Daniel, do you want to rate it?
It's a solid 8 from me.
This is very, very impressive. Well, this used to be an 8 for me until the most recent viewing, and I thought, you know what, this holds up so well, and I see new aspects that I love every time. So I've actually bumped this up to a 9.
Ooh.
So, yeah, 9 for me. Tarantino, he did a bit of uncredited script work, script doctoring, between Four Rooms and his next film. On Crimson Tide for Tony Scott, and The Rock, Michael Bay's good film.
Interesting.
So
don't feel it, do you? It's not like their dialogue.
No, I know, but I mean, films. The Rock is notably the one Michael Bay film where the script actually holds up, so maybe that's got something to do with it. And then we come to the last film of the episode.
Yeah.
Probably Tarantino's least well-known out of his main canon, would you say?
Yeah.
Jackie Brown.
Yeah. So, yeah, Jackie Brown, essentially his third film.
Yeah.
From a directing point of view.
His homage to the blaxploitation genre. I mean, that's kind of how it was intended. I don't think that really comes across very much.
It doesn't. That's what I always hear. And obviously, you got Pam Grier there, and it doesn't come across. It doesn't have the style of blaxploitation in the same way that, like, Kill Bill has a martial arts film style to it, or
Django Unchained's a western. Yeah, Django Unchained's more blaxploitation influenced in terms of how it's put together and made.
But the way this is shot, the way that the plot is quite convoluted, is not very in keeping with blaxploitation. It doesn't feel like blaxploitation at all. It's sort of like that's something that's said about it, which I've never.
I've never quite bought into that. So you watched this specifically for this podcast? Is that right, Dan?
Well, it's always been on the list, but never really had a reason to sit down and watch it. Like, in particular,
this is a film I only came to quite, the last few years. Compared to the other Tarantino films, it took me a while to get to it. I had watched it a while ago.
Yeah, I haven't seen it for years. I've seen it, but it was a long time ago. I couldn't have told you in much detail. So, it was fairly new to me.
And I mean, I forgot Robert De Niro was in it altogether, actually. It was a pleasant surprise when I sat down to watch it again.
I was not expecting him to be in it, and then I was not expecting the type of character that he plays to For him to play that character is just...
He wanted to play the Samuel L. Jackson role, Ordell Robbie, and I think like Tarantino was like, well, no, that's Samuel L. Jackson. Sorry, that's like a deal breaker. But I do still need to cast this other part if you're interested. And he was like, all right, well, I want to work with Tarantino.
Just a side note of Samuel Jackson's ponytail. It was very amusing it was an interesting costume choice and character style.
I might be wrong saying this. I think that was Samuel L. Jackson's doing. I think he wanted that haircut and just said, like, my character should have this.
Well, can I make a sort of my major complaint with this film? It's
Yeah.
kind of relevant to what we've just been saying. I think the casting is all off. And now...
Yeah, I agree.
Totally off. I think Samuel L. Jackson is doing what he does, and that's fine, although it's not quite as magic as Samuel L. Jackson can be. Pam Grier, I think, is solid. Robert Forster's solid, but Robert Forster has a very naturalistic style, which doesn't quite...
He's the highlight
come
of
across
this
here.
film for me.
Yeah, but I'm not sure it quite fits with the film. I like what he's doing. Other than those guys, everyone else, it just feels very bland, like they're not bringing it. And Robert De Niro brings nothing to that character at all. And there's not a lot there. But
I think there's an element of... He does a really good job playing the part, and I think it's interesting to see him kind of play against type to a point.
I don't know.
I think this is a good example of De Niro being a real fucking pro actor, actually. I think he brings a lot of small, little, subtle details to a role without overshadowing anyone, without it being too obvious what he's doing. I think he's actually very good here. I think he's being cast in a weird role for him, but I think he really rises to the...
But
challenge.
no, I don't find it very bland. I think he's bland. Bridget Fonda's bland. Michael Keaton is bland. It was blandness, and it was just like, I want some more character here. I want, and the film's too slow to get away with it. It needs more. It just needs a bit. more life
I do agree
to
with you there. It did.
Yeah.
It did take a while for me to get into it when I was watching it.
I agree with that as well. I think Samuel L. Jackson is perhaps a bit miscast here because I don't know. He's not. I don't really know what level his character's pitched at. It's like, he's almost too friendly. The way he comes across, just inherently in this film, is like quite personable. But then I think he's meant to be quite unpleasant and menacing, like the stuff he does. But then it just doesn't quite. I don't know how I'm meant to take him.
Isn't that why it's so eerie? The fact that he is kind of like your best friend that you'd have a chat with and a drink with, that then might just shoot you in the stomach in the car in the middle of nowhere.
But then it just doesn't. It never really comes across to me that that's what they're going for. If that is the idea.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is that you've got the Bridget Fonda's character who just disrespects him all the time and just tells him to fuck off. And he never really chastises it. Like, even in a kind of menacing way, he just lets her get away with it. And so you don't feel that threatening by him. Like,
well, this is it. I think Robert De Niro's character is far more that menacing, could turn on you out of nowhere. Because he does. He goes, right, I've had enough of this. Shoot. Bam.
You're dead now.
That felt like too out of nowhere for me. Like, if he'd just smacked her or something, it would have made sense. Yeah.
It was too late in the game, I agree. I think we needed more of that earlier. But I agree, though. Like, I think out of all of Tarantino's films, this one's just lacking in personality. And it almost...
Yeah.
It's almost like he's got so much reverence for the book that it's based on by Elmore Leonard.
Yeah.
Because this is, we should mention actually, the only time in Tarantino's entire career that he has adapted an existing property rather than writing something that's quote unquote original. And it feels like he's scared to mess around. Like, he's got so much respect for the fact that someone else has written this or part of it, and it's their story and it's their characters.
He can't quite make it his own in this. He's like,
and I mean, I think the thing is, he does. Like, he has made it his own insofar as Jackie Brown is a white woman in the book, and she's not called Jackie Brown.
Yeah, but that's details, isn't it? Like, it certainly doesn't feel Tarantino-esque in terms of the dialogue. There's no real snap to it. Maybe a little bit with Samuel Jackson every now and then, but...
I don't think Tarantino's got a cameo in it anywhere.
See, him playing the Robert De Niro part, I could see.
It's just very restrained, and it's an odd choice for him. It almost feels like he was...
shying away.
Trying to take a step back from what he was known for, or it's the kind of film you'd expect to see if he just made a real stinker and had become derided and people were saying, oh, like Tim Burton nowadays, or M. Night Shyamalan or something, and then they come back with this kind of smaller, muted film that just kind of shows, look, I can make a quality product.
And then we do start playing with it at the end, where we see the actual kind of the denouement, the heist bit, from several different perspectives.
That's true.
That's where we get to start to see that, and it does work. But my general problem with this is that I never felt tense. I never felt that the stakes were there, and I don't know why that was. Because in terms of the character, it's a tense situation. But perhaps just in terms of direction, it didn't come across.
That's what you guys were saying before, though, of like the Samuel Jackson's character. Basically, very near the beginnings of the film, we have Jackie Brown turn to him and say, basically, don't fuck with me, and he goes, yeah, all right. And that's it. We lose that level of like tension between the good and the bad guy, so to speak. Like,
you always get the sense that she can kind of talk a way out of a bad situation with him and the police as well.
Yeah,
you never really.
Yeah, she has a bit too much control, doesn't she, for someone who's reeling?
Yeah.
But I mean, as far as like, I think this is a perfectly pleasant little film, and it does the trick. It's just you kind of expect more from Tarantino. And again, there's a subset of Tarantino fans who will point to this as, no, look, this is his best work, and it's like, no, it's not.
That's it. I've heard of people put this really high on a pedestal, like you need to watch Jackie Brown because it's his best film. So like, then when coming to watch it, I had like high expectations of what it was going to be, and like you said, it's a pleasant film.
I've seen people point to it as proof that he can direct when people say he can't, and I think that might just be because this is inoffensive direction. It's not taking the risks and the weird punches that he normally does with his directing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he can put together a mainstream film, I suppose.
But like Roger Ebert was like, I think he said this was Tarantino's best film. Like it's a weird little underground opinion that exists, and I just find it very strange because it's in the bottom half of his career for me. If Tarantino directed stuff like that, he probably would just go on to be a director who adapts people's books a lot, maybe makes a Marvel film.
Yeah.
It's not what he's known for, but it's not bad. It's good directing. He'd be I'm trying to think of an analogy now. A Tony Scott. I don't know.
The ending was a bit anticlimactic of the film in the sense that it was like, how will we get rid of this guy? Shoot him. Okay.
Yeah.
And obviously it's a bit more complex than that because they do it in such a way that they get away with this money and nobody even realises. And the police think they've cleaned everything up. So, okay, there's more to it than that. But it was just a bit like, oh, is that the end? Okay.
Yeah, and it's more about Robert Forster's Max Cherry character and his dynamic with Jackie Brown, isn't it, really? The conclusion of the film. I don't really have much else to say about it. It's not bad at all.
True. I still enjoyed the soundtrack in the film, and like something we haven't really mentioned on any of the.
I was going to say I'm very aware we haven't touched on the soundtrack really to these films yet. I'm definitely going to go into it a lot next week, but this is one thing Tarantino's known for. He's one of these sort of directors who likes to play DJ and will curate give him credit, an amazing soundtrack of songs. He always pulls out wonderful music.
He really does.
But
it makes it work in a relevant way. And
He also is an odd director in that until very recently he's made a big song and dance out of not letting composers make music for his films, and he just uses music from other films to score what he's doing. And I think there's something to be said for that, and it certainly adds to a film. At the same time, I think Tarantino's got a lot of credit for purely picking out a good song to play over the opening credits, and this is no exception. I love Across 110th Street. It's an amazing song.
Yeah, it really is.
But at the same time, I feel like Tarantino's cheating, because I love the opening of this film, but it's just because I love that song. And it's a nice shot that it's playing over the top of, but does he get credit for that? I mean, I can build a playlist as well, But I do intend to go into that in a bit more detail next week.
So, ratings for Jackie Brown?
It's a 7 for me. Solid 7.
7 for me, yeah.
Because it was the first time, because of the expectation, and I enjoyed it more than I thought I was gonna. I'm gonna give it an 8, but that would probably change if I watched it another time. But like, I think first time watching,
I think if anything, I enjoyed it more on this rewatch because I think I went in with lower expectations than I did the first time. So I think it's a solid 7. It's just you kind of hope for more from Tarantino.
Yeah, maybe it's just unremarkable.
Anyway, I mean, yeah, that's the first biggest chunk of his career that we're going to be covering. We'll be covering Kill Bill and Grindhouse, arguably only 2 films next week. Also, arguably 4 films. Yeah, but time to do some sequel stuff, as that's what this show is. Now, interestingly, there is yet to be a sequel to any of Tarantino's core films. From Dusk Till Dawn does have sequels, but there's yet to be any to his directorial efforts.
And Kill Bill is one story.
Ignoring Kill Bill was shot as one film and chopped up, so ignoring that. But Tarantino has come very close on a number of times. He's always talking about sequels he wants to make. So do you want to know all the sequels I researched that were talked about?
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
Films? All right, so Pulp Fiction. This is one of the most well-known, I think. Double V Vega, which was the what are they called? Vincent Vega and
Vic Vega
from Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction are brothers in Tarantino's shared universe that he does. And he's spoken at length about his desire to do this kind of crossover sequel about their time in Amsterdam. So I guess a prequel, actually, to Pulp Fiction. And Reservoir Dogs, because they die. But yeah, about their time together in Amsterdam. You'd see him go into the McDonald's and order a Big Mac, and they'd go, "What, Big Mac? Le Big Mac? What are you talking about?" I don't think it's a great loss that never got made, honestly. Nothing about it sounds particularly amazing. Now they're both too old for it to ever happen.
Wouldn't it be even better now?
Well, at one point, apparently after they got too old, Tarantino was talking about how he'd rewritten it to work as those two playing another two brothers that happen to look exactly like the younger two brothers who meet at the funeral of their siblings to mourn them. But I just can't see it ever happening at this point. I think
unlikely.
Past. I think Tarantino is probably not interested in doing it anymore. Especially now Tarantino switched gear into, I'm making 10 films and that's my legacy and then I'm out. And he's got 2 films left if he stays true to that. And I mean, I don't know if he will or not, but if anyone's going to stay true to that I'm retiring nonsense, it's him. The other idea was he was going to do a sequel all about Jules Winfield going off and
walking the earth type thing.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, that's the obvious route, I guess.
And some people...
Now that could be a blaxploitation film.
Yeah, it could. That would work really well.
You could do that.
There is a fan theory that he becomes the pianist in Kill Bill, because he talks about wandering the earth, just playing the piano and blah, 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 blah. Now, Jackie Brown is a bit of a weird one, because it was based on the book Rum Punch, and there was an adaptation of another book starring Michael Keaton as that same character from the book.
Oh, yeah.
So it is technically, arguably, a sequel. It was directed by other people. And someone called Dan Schechter, I think that is, was developing an adaptation of a Jackie Brown prequel novel in 2012, but I don't think it ever got made. And there's also Tarantino's spoken about wanting to adapt a book called 40 Lashes Less One, which was another book by the same author, Elmore Leonard. And he's spoken about maybe doing that as an HBO miniseries or something like that. So, I mean, I think if he does say, right, I'm done with my 10 films, I think he will just be like, right, I'll make a miniseries.
Over to TV now.
Yeah. So yeah, they're the ones for this week. I've got more of this for each of his films as we carry on going. But yeah. So What would we do with that? Oh, should we pitch a new Tarantino film or an actual sequel to one of these? I mean, Pulp Fiction's the one we were, I guess, meant to be doing.
Yeah.
Going back to what we were saying about earlier, how they were potentially all within the same universe, well, Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction.
Yeah.
What about some weird crossover film with characters from Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs, and Jackie Brown?
Well, if we're gonna do this, let's make it the big Tarantino blowout bonanza, and we link it all together.
Link everyone.
Yeah.
I've made a list here, which was my best effort at figuring out the chronology of this Tarantino universe, and I think there's some messy stuff here. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but okay, so we start in the Wild Wild West.
Yep.
Django Unchained, Hateful Eight days. This is a little preview for upcoming episodes as well, obviously. Here we meet Oswaldo Mowbray, later revealed to be the English Pete Hickox, Tim Roth. Then cut forward to 1940s Inglourious Bastards. We meet a British World War II agent, great-great-great-grandson of Pete Hickox, Archie Hickox, played by Michael Fassbender. Obviously, World War II goes down very differently, with Hitler being killed a lot earlier and by the Americans, and essentially it has the impact of desensitizing Americans to violence and making them put more emphasis on pop culture, because cinema and film has such a big part in bringing him down. He's at the premiere of a film, he's in a cinema. Sergeant Donnie Donowitz goes on to have a son, Lee Donowitz, who grows up with huge reverence for pop culture and cinema because of his dad's role in the war. He becomes the character we see in True Romance, the film producer. Then at some point pre-1992, the Vega brothers hang out in Amsterdam. Vincent runs a club for Marcellus Wallace. That's when they go to McDonald's and order beers and things. Then 1992, Vic joins a heist as seen in Reservoir Dogs, or not seen in Reservoir Dogs, I suppose. We first meet Vic, we hear about his parole officer, Seymour Scugnetti. In the script, Eddie says Bonnie's going to take care of the dying guy. That's the nurse I mentioned before. Mr. White's like, he needs a doctor, not a nurse. Obviously, she then pops up in one form in Pulp Fiction. Mr. White mentions that he was mentoring a call girl, Alabama, as later seen in True Romance. 1994, Vincent Vaughn does all of Pulp Fiction. Seems like Harvey Keitel is related to Jimmy Dimmick, although that's not 100%. Bonnie, nurse, brother of Seymour, as mentioned before. Detective Jack Scugnetti becomes famous for tracking down and catching Mickey and Mallory Knox, as seen in Natural Born Killers. Uma Thurman talks about the Fox Force 5, her failed pilot, in which there was a blonde one. She was the leader. The Japanese Fox was a kung fu master. The black girl was a demolition expert. The French Fox, her speciality was sex. The character I played was the deadliest woman in the world with a knife. That is, of course, something that will come up later. Then From Dusk Till Dawn's released into the cinemas within this world, perhaps starring Jimmy Dimmick. He was hanging around in Hollywood in 1996. Maybe he was trying to be an actor. 2003, Kill Bill is released within this universe. It seems to be a film based on the Fox Force 5. Although this doesn't quite work because there's an inconsistency. When she's buried alive in Kill Bill, it's under the grave of Paula Schultz, who is the wife of Dr. King Schultz, as seen in Django Unchained, who of course was real and not part of a film. So none of this quite adds up at all, and it's stupid. And then we've got the McGraw brothers, who play those Texas Rangers, and they just exist in
They're
half
not
these
brothers,
films.
they're father and son.
Oh, you're right, they are, the McGraw, sorry, yeah, father and son. And they're in From Dusk Till Dawn, Death Proof,
Kill Bill,
Planet Terror. One of them has a daughter called Dakota, she's in Planet Terror. And I stopped bothering reading into it, because it just keeps going. So how can we tie that all together in one big film?
By making Tarantino the main protagonist of it all. He's going on an adventure throughout time.
They all die and go to the afterlife, and Tarantino is God.
The idea of Tarantino has a magic cinema that he can go into, like Last Action Hero. And no, it's Last Action Hero. That's what they do in that. Although in that it's a.
I think if this is a Tarantino film, it has to be the final film in his canon, his 10th and final film.
Which would make sense for it to be like a sequel to everything he's done prior to that. Like,
yeah. I mean, he's making his 9th now, and he is allegedly officially directing a Star Trek film, but he's not writing it. So I think he'll be like, that one doesn't count. I didn't write it. If he even makes it.
That's a weird choice for a
That's
Star
if he even makes it. I wouldn't be surprised if it happens. I mean, should we go back to what we were saying before? So what have we got? If we were going to do a direct sequel here, Jackie Brown, there's loads of books in that series that you could draw on, but it's not. No one's that interested, I think.
No.
Reservoir Dogs, no one needs a sequel to that. It's very self-contained. But yeah, Pulp Fiction, if I was going to pick something that I wanted to see, I think it would be the Jules from Pulp Fiction continuation. I think that character's so just wonderful. You could just watch him do anything.
But then is that a sequel or more of just a spin-off?
Works either way.
Yeah, spin-off would be fine. The Jules spin-off. You could make a sequel and follow Bruce Willis and other characters on, but you don't really need to. Tim Roth and co. See what happens to them. He becomes a bellboy.
Okay, so if we take on the Jules walks the world storyline, that would probably be really well suited to doing blaxploitation.
Yeah.
But I actually don't know that much about blaxploitation to be able to pitch you an idea.
I think, and this is it, Tarantino really seems like he, not so much his early work, so we haven't really spoken about it, but he seems very much now like, I just want to make my version of a film in this genre and tick them off. This is a genre I love, I'm doing one of these, or I'm going to do one of these now. And he's done that. He's done that with Westerns, he's done it with World War II films, he's done it with Kung Fu films. And there's not a huge amount left for him. Like I say, I think
sci-fi.
Horror and sci-fi, Star Trek, that'll be his sci-fi if he does make it. He dabbles with horror and Death Proof as well, I suppose, but he's never quite done it. I think he used to say he wanted to do one, but then he sort of changed his tune and was like, I don't really care. He also said he wanted to do a musical, actually. But he hasn't.
Ooh.
But I don't know, I just cannot see that.
Can we not make the life of Jules into some kind of musical on his way? You know, he is like semi-religious. You know, get all a bit gospel and everything. Like, Whoopi Goldberg in there, like.
But
what do you think would happen with Jules if we were to follow him? I mean, do you think he'd stay a changed man? Do you think he'd fall back into old habits?
Well,
like,
where do we?
Well, that would be the path of the film, wouldn't it? It'd be his new sense is being challenged.
Just as I'm trying to get out, they pull me back in. It would be that.
Where does this film start? Does it start as we leave him in Pulp Fiction? Does he get up from the restaurant and this new film starts? Or?
Well, I think ideally it would open on him leaving the diner, but it was like 20 years ago, so...
But surely the best thing would be he wants to walk away, and then not very long after, his good old partner Vincent is killed.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Oh, shit, yeah.
And then Marcellus Wallace, for some reason that he won't tell him, says, no, I'm going to let the guy go, the boxer. And so it's like Jules has to find Bruce Willis.
Shit, man, I hadn't considered this, but this is set up for a really good... Yeah,
exactly. So everyone knows that Bruce Willis killed one of his men and he's not doing anything about it, and they're all like, what the fuck's going on? And then Jeremy Irons threatens them with a bomb and they have to work together.
There's a significant amount of explosive in the trash receptacle next to you. As I was going to St. Ives, I met a man with 7 wives. Every wife had 7 sacks. Every sack has 7 cats. Every cat has 7 kittens. Kittens, cats, sacks, and wives. How many were going to St. Ives? My phone number is 555.
No, wait, I didn't get all that. Say it again.
Not a chance. My phone number is 555 and the answer. Call me in 30 seconds or die.
All right, 7 guys with 7 wives.
Shut up, McClane. I'm good at this.
7 guys with 7 wives.
Shut the fuck up, McClane.
Brilliant.
Yeah. We have established in multiple films at this point that Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson is a dynamite combination.
Yeah.
Right? Obviously, they don't have any scenes together in Pulp Fiction, but Die Hard with a Vengeance and Unbreakable, 2 of the finest performances from either actor. And
they just play off each other so well, don't they, in both of those films?
So, yeah, I mean... Fuck, let's do this. Let's get them on the screen together again.
Like, I can't believe that we didn't actually see
the potential for this sequel whilst talking about it. The fact it is very much set up for just
But I think the actual journey would be perhaps he does go and he's the one who finds Bruce Willis, and they're going to go, yeah, we're going to get our revenge, and we don't know why Marcellus Wallace isn't letting us.
Amazingly, we've gone a whole episode without touching on what a prevalent theme revenge is for Tarantino. It's in almost all of his films. It's more Kill Bill onwards, but it's a major theme throughout his material. So I think this would be very on brand for Tarantino to
and then this could be the ultimate challenge of Jules's newfound faith, and or not even faith necessarily, but
oh man, you know what? This genuinely, I wouldn't mind this as like the 10th and final film from Tarantino. Bring it all back to Pulp Fiction. Bring it all back to nearly the start. Even if it's like several years on and he's been hunting him down and he finally gets a lead or something.
Yeah, it's 25 years on, and he's been walking the world, and it's like this is the one thing he's always sort of wondered about,
needed to do,
regretted. Yeah, and so he goes and finds Bruce Willis, not necessarily to try and kill him.
I think they would,
but just to kind of find some closure, and then it becomes this sort of character drama between the two of them. And then if you need to make it exciting, then they have to team up to fight some common foe or something.
On one hand, it feels like the time has passed, and on the other hand, I think Tarantino's still such a big draw. Pulp Fiction's still such a big deal that you start putting the marketing out for that, and people would get excited for it. And hell, look, like Glass is coming out next year that follow up to Unbreakable. So, like, just because it feels like the time's passed doesn't mean that
it necessarily has.
Yeah.
I think that's a weird thing that's going on in cinema anyways.
I think purely because Tarantino has made such a big song and dance about 10 films and out, and that's it for me, and that's the end of my career. If he's going to stay true to that, I think it'd be weird if his 10th and final film is just any old
a standalone
film, this would be a really nice way to serve as like a bow on the end of it, cap it all off. Let's revisit the early stuff, kind of look at people aging and so on. He had similar plans for Kill Bill, but I'll go into that next week. I'm happy with that. I'd really like that. Go on, Tarantino, go off and write it and pop a check in the mail.
Yeah,
you can have that one for free, Tarantino.
Yeah,
I would like you, in fact, Tarantino, have it for free. Don't even have to credit us. Just do some interviews and tell people to listen to Diminishing Returns podcast. in fact, in the film, Samuel L. Jackson's driving and he's listening to
it. Brilliant. I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
I'm happy with that.
Seems like something he'd be into.
Yeah. I reckon he's a changed man. He'd be well into film discussion. Or we could have Jimmy Dimmick somehow in the film and he's listening to it, because that's the kind of character he's listening to our show. that's such a fucking diss against our listeners.
But
but Samuel L. Jackson's not listening though, is he? It's the Jimmy Dimmick. Oh god. Right. Thank you very much for listening to this week's episode of Diminishing Returns. Remember to come back not only next week, but the week after that as well, for parts 2 and 3 of our Quentin Tarantino season. Next week we'll be covering Kill Bill and Grindhouse. As ever, please like us on our social media platforms, facebook.com/Diminishing Returns Podcast, Twitter, where we are @DimReturnsPod, SoundCloud, iTunes. Review us, tell your friends. Tell Quentin Tarantino, tell him what we're up to. Get him listening. He's a film fan, he'll enjoy this. Alright, bye.
What do we call you, sir? First name, Mr. Last name, bad motherfucker.